What if I told you that the most famous drink on planet Earth, a bottle so recognizable that people who cannot read English can still point to it, was mixed up in a backyard in Atlanta by a wounded soldier who was quietly addicted to morphine and just wanted to stop the pain? And what if that was only the beginning? What if the sandwich millions of Americans queue for every single day, the sweetest onion you have ever tasted, the diner that never ever closes its doors, and the little box of mint cookies that a 9-year-old sells on your doorstep every spring all came from the exact same state? Everybody thinks they know Georgia. Peaches. That is the whole story, right? A peach on the number plate, a peach in the songs. Peaches, peaches, peaches. But here is the detail that stops people cold. Georgia barely cracks the top 3 peach-producing states in America. California grows more. South Carolina grows more. The peach state is, quietly, a bit of a fraud on that one front. And yet the food and drink this place actually did invent, the things it gave to the whole world, that list is so long and so wild that once you see it, you will never look at a road trip through the American South the same way again. I am going to take you through 11 of them. Real inventions, real dates, real people, and a few facts that even folks born and raised in Georgia have never heard. Stick with me all the way to number 1, because the last one is not a fancy restaurant dish or a billion-dollar brand at all. It is a humble roadside snack with a name that carries a history most people would rather forget. Let us get into it. Food number 1, Coca-Cola. I know. You saw this coming. But you have almost certainly never heard the real version of the story, so give me 2 minutes. Rewind to Atlanta in the year 1886. The city is still rebuilding itself from the ashes of the Civil War, and one of the men walking its streets is a pharmacist named John Stith Pemberton. Now, Pemberton was a Confederate veteran, and during the war, he had been slashed across the chest by a saber. Like a huge number of wounded men in that era, he was given morphine for the agony. And like a huge number of those men, he came out the other side dependent on it. So here is a man in chronic pain, quietly hooked on an opiate, and working as a chemist. He becomes obsessed with finding a tonic, a pick-me-up, something that could give people energy and ease their nerves without the morphine. His first big product was a wine mixed with coca leaf, a genuinely popular drink at the time. But then Atlanta and Fulton County passed a temperance law, effectively banning alcohol, and Pemberton's wine tonic was suddenly illegal to sell. Most people would have given up. Pemberton went back to the mixing bench and set out to build a non-alcoholic version. He brewed up a thick, sweet syrup, and the plan was that you would mix a measure of that syrup with plain water. But one day at Jacob's Pharmacy, so the story goes, it was accidentally mixed with carbonated soda water instead, and everyone agreed the fizzy version was far better. They put it on sale for 5 cents a glass. Now here's the part almost nobody knows. Pemberton was a brilliant chemist, but a hopeless marketer. It was his bookkeeper, a man named Frank Robinson, who came up with the name Coca-Cola, and it was Robinson who wrote it out in that flowing script, the exact handwriting style you still see on every bottle and can today. That famous logo is essentially a bookkeeper's penmanship from the 1880s. And here's the detail that stops people cold. Pemberton, sick and short of money, sold off the rights to his own invention piece by piece before he died, and a shrewd businessman named Asa Kamler ended up acquiring the whole enterprise for a figure most historians put at somewhere around $2,300. $2,300. Today, Coca-Cola products are drunk something like 1.9 billion times every single day around the world. And the same company gave us Sprite, Fanta, Tab, and Fresca. All of it grew out of a wounded veteran's search for a way to stop hurting, mixed up in Atlanta, Georgia. Food number 2, and we are staying in Georgia, but moving forward in time to a working-class suburb of Atlanta called Hapeville. The year is 1946. A young man named Truett Cathy opens a tiny diner with just a handful of stools and calls it the Dwarf Grill, later the Dwarf House. It is the kind of place that fries eggs and flips burgers for factory workers coming off their shifts. But Cathy had an idea that would not let him go. Everybody was doing burgers. What if you could do for chicken what the burger had done for beef? A proper, handheld chicken sandwich you could eat on the move. The problem was time. Frying a chicken breast the traditional way took far too long for a fast lunch counter. Kathy spent years experimenting, and his breakthrough was to cook a seasoned, boneless chicken breast in a pressure cooker, the same sort of pressure fryer that could turn out a juicy piece of chicken in a fraction of the usual time. He put that breast on a warm buttered bun with 2, and only ever 2, dill pickle slices. No lettuce, no tomato, no fuss. Just chicken, bun, pickles. He trademarked the recipe in the early 1960s, and because he could not think of a better word for the premium cut of chicken he was using, he spelled it his own way, using a capital A to suggest top grade, top quality. That is where the odd spelling of the brand comes from. The first proper standalone restaurant opened in a shopping mall in Atlanta in 1967. And here is the detail that stops people cold. Truett Cathy was a devout man, and from that very first diner he made a rule that the business would close every Sunday so that staff could rest and worship. To this day, one of the biggest fast food chains in America deliberately shuts its doors one day in 7, walking away from an enormous amount of money every week. All because of a promise a young man made in a tiny grill in Hateville, Georgia. Food number 3 takes us southeast to the beautiful old port city of Savannah, and it involves a group you would never associate with a global food empire: little girls. It is March 1912, and a remarkable woman named Juliette Gordon Low, known to everyone as Daisy, has just founded the very first troop of what would become the Girl Scouts of the USA. 18 girls in Savannah. Daisy was, by any measure, ahead of her time. She was partially deaf, she was fiercely independent, and she believed girls should be out camping, learning first aid, earning their own way, and standing on their own 2 feet, at a time when society expected them to do very little of any of that. And how do you fund an organization run by and for young girls? You let the girls fund it themselves. They began baking simple sugar cookies in their own home kitchens, boxing them up and selling them to friends and neighbors to raise money for their activities. Now I am going to be honest with you here, because the tidy version of this story is not quite the full truth. While the Girl Scout movement itself absolutely began in Savannah, Georgia, some of the earliest documented cookie sales on record actually happened elsewhere, including a well-known school sale out in Oklahoma a few years later. Georgia gave birth to the movement and the tradition. The exact first cookie changing hands is a little messier than the legend. But the tradition took root, it spread across the entire country, and it grew into something staggering. And here's the detail that stops people cold. Those little boxes now bring in somewhere in the region of $800 million a year. Think about that. It is one of the single largest annual sales events run entirely by children anywhere on Earth. And the best-selling variety, the Thin Mint, outsells products from companies with billion-dollar advertising budgets. All of it traces back to 18 girls and one determined, half-deaf woman in Savannah, Georgia. Food number 4 is not a brand at all. It is a vegetable. And it is one of those things where the place made the food, and the food is now legally tied to the place forever. I am talking about the Vidalia onion. Picture the depths of the Great Depression, around 1931, in a small farming community in southeast Georgia. A farmer named Mose Coleman planted a crop of onions and, when he pulled them up, got the shock of his life. They were sweet. Not sharp, not eye-wateringly pungent like every other onion he had ever grown, but genuinely, mildly sweet. Sweet enough that you could very nearly bite into one, like an apple. At first, he worried something had gone wrong. But it turned out the soil in that particular pocket of Georgia was unusually low in sulfur, and sulfur is exactly what gives onions their harsh, tear-inducing bite. Low sulfur in the ground, low bite in the bulb. Coleman started selling his strange, sweet onions, and even in the teeth of the Depression, when nobody had a penny to spare, people were reportedly willing to pay around $3.50 for a 50-pound bag, which was a small fortune at the time. Word spread. The onions were shipped through the town of Vidalia, the local rail and market hub, and the name stuck. And here is the detail that stops people cold. Those onions are so tied to that specific low-sulfur soil that the name is now protected by federal law. A genuine Vidalia onion can only legally be grown in a defined region of around 20 designated counties in Georgia. Grow the identical seed a state away, and you are legally forbidden from calling it a Vidalia. In 1990, it was even named the official state vegetable. An accident of the soil during the worst economic disaster in American history turned one confused farmer's crop into a protected national treasure. Food number 5 is a place more than a plate, but the food it invented has its own secret language, and I promise you will use this the next time you travel through the South. In the town of Avondale Estates, just outside Atlanta, on Labor Day weekend in 1955, two men named Joe Rogers Sr. and Tom Faulkner opened a small restaurant. Their ideal was simple, but at the time, slightly radical. They would build a sit-down diner that never closed. Not at night, not on holidays, not ever. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, the lights stay on and the grill stays hot. They put the waffle front and center of the menu because it was high margin and fast, and they named the place after it. But the truly clever invention was not the waffle at all. It was a spoken code. To keep the kitchen fast and the orders flying, staff developed a whole shorthand vocabulary, especially for the hash browns. You can have them scattered, meaning spread across the grill, smothered with onions, covered with cheese, chunked with ham, diced with tomato, and on and on. A regular can rattle off a string of these words and get a completely customized plate in seconds. And here is the detail that stops people cold. This chain became so dependable, so genuinely always open, that emergency planners in the United States began using it as an informal measure of how bad a natural disaster really is. If a hurricane hits and the local branch is open and serving a full menu, the damage is manageable. If it is open but serving a limited menu, things are bad. And if that restaurant, the one that famously never closes, has actually shut its doors, then you know the disaster is catastrophic. It became known, only half-jokingly, as an index used to gauge the severity of a storm, all from two men in Avondale Estates who simply decided their diner would never turn off the lights. Food number 6 is a drink, and it is going to feel familiar and completely surprising at the same time. Travel to Columbus, Georgia, right down on the Alabama border, in the early 1900s. A young man named Claude Hatcher runs a wholesale grocery business with his family, and he is furious. He is furious about how much he has to pay a certain famous Atlanta cola company for the syrup to sell their drinks in his stores. So Claude does something bold. He decides he will simply invent his own. In 1905, he starts formulating soft drinks in the basement of the family grocery. His early cola went by the name Chero Cola, and he built out a whole line of fruit-flavored sodas under the brand Knee-High, a name that played on the idea of the bottles being knee-high. Eventually, the flagship cola was refined and relaunched in 1934 under the name it is still known by, Royal Crown Cola, or RC for short. Now, if that were the whole story, it would just be a plucky underdog cola. But this company kept innovating in ways that genuinely changed the industry. And here are the two details that stop people cold. First, this Georgia company was a pioneer of the canned soft drink, putting cola into cans for the mass market in the 1950s, back when almost everything still came in glass bottles. And second, and this is the big one, in 1958, they launched a sugar-free cola called Diet Right, which is widely credited as the first diet soft drink ever mass-marketed in America. Every single sugar-free, calorie-free, fizzy drink you have ever picked up, that entire multi-billion-dollar category, traces its lineage back to a grocer's son in Columbus, Georgia, who was too stubborn to keep paying for someone else's cereal. Food number 7 is where the arguments start, because this is a dish that two American states have been politely, and sometimes not so politely, fighting over for more than a century. Brunswick stew. It is a thick, rich, slow-cooked stew, traditionally built from smoked meats, tomatoes, sweet corn, lima beans, and a good hit of southern spice, cooked down until a spoon can almost stand up in it. The town of Brunswick, right on the Georgia coast, claims it as their own with total confidence. They will tell you, and they have got a monument to back it up, that the very first pot of true Brunswick stew was cooked on St. Simon's Island on the 2nd of July, 1898, in an enormous 25-gallon iron pot. That original pot is displayed in the town to this day as proof. But here is the complication, the detail that stops people cold. Just up the coast, the state of Virginia makes its own furious claim, insisting their version of Brunswick stew predates the Georgia one by decades, going back to the 1820s in Brunswick County, Virginia, where the story involves a camp cook and a pot of squirrel stew. So who is right? Honestly, both sides have genuine history, and food historians have never fully settled it. What is not in dispute is that Georgia embraced the dish so completely and cooks it so proudly at every barbecue and church gathering along the coast that for millions of people, Brunswick stew simply is a Georgia food. Monument, iron pot, coastal town, and all. It is one of the great friendly feuds in American cooking, and Georgia is not backing down. Food number 8 takes us back to Atlanta and to a genuine roadside icon. The year is 1928. A young man named Frank Gordy opens a small food stand near the Georgia Tech campus. Over the following decades, that stand grows and grows until it becomes what many people call the largest drive-in restaurant in the world. A vast operation capable of serving thousands of hungry customers a day, with car hops and a counter and a roar of noise. It gave America the immortal greeting bellowed at every customer, that rapid-fire, "What'll you have? What'll you have?" Its chili dogs are legendary. But the invention I want to focus on is the drink, because it is something you genuinely cannot get anywhere else in quite the same form. It is a frozen, creamy orange concoction, a sort of cross between an orange soda and a milkshake, and a soft ice cream, whipped up so thick you eat it with a spoon as much as you drink it. Regulars simply order it by its initials. And here is the detail that stops people cold. This place has been so protective of that recipe, and so tied to its single Atlanta location and its handful of Georgia spin-offs, that this frosty orange treat has become a genuine pilgrimage food. People who grew up in Georgia and then moved away will drive for hours, will build entire road trips around getting one more cup of that frozen orange. It is not sold in shops. It is not franchised across the country. To get the real thing, you essentially have to come to Georgia, walk in, and shout your order back at the man who shouts, "What'll you have?" Frank Gordy's little stand from 1928 turned a frozen orange drink into a reason to come home. Food number 9 is going to make some of you laugh, because it is a food that half the world loves and the other half loves to mock. And Georgia is, without exaggeration, its world capital. I am talking about fruitcake. Specifically, the dense, jeweled, candied fruit and nut fruitcake that turns up every holiday season. Head to the small town of Claxton, Georgia. Back in 1910, an Italian immigrant baker named Savino Tos set up a bakery there. In time, the business passed to a local man named Albert Parker, and the Claxton fruitcake was born, packed with candied cherries, pineapple, raisins, and pecans, baked dense and heavy, and built to last. Now here is where it gets clever, and here is the detail that stops people cold. This little bakery, in a small Georgia town, teamed up with civic clubs, the local service organizations, and turned the fruitcake into a fundraiser. Every autumn, volunteers across the country would sell these cakes to raise money for their community projects, which meant a single small-town Georgia bakery was suddenly shipping fruitcakes out by the ton to every corner of America. The scale became so enormous that Claxton proudly calls itself the fruitcake capital of the world, and it means it. Millions of pounds of fruitcake pour out of that one small Georgia town every year. So the next time someone makes the tired old joke about how nobody actually eats fruitcake, you can tell them that an entire Georgia town's economy and a small mountain of charity fundraising is built on the fact that an awful lot of people very much do. Food number 10 brings us to a college town, and to two friends with a frankly brilliant and slightly rebellious business idea. Statesboro, Georgia, in 1990. Two men, Zach McElroy and Tony Townley, decide to open a restaurant. Zach handles the food and the front of house. Tony handles the business and the systems. They build their whole menu around a food that was becoming enormously popular: the chicken finger, those strips of tender, breaded, fried chicken breast. But what really set the place apart, and what turned it into a beloved regional chain, was the sauce. They developed a signature dipping sauce, a tangy, creamy, slightly peppery blend, and they guarded that recipe closely. The brand's whole personality became this cheeky, irreverent, hand-drawn, tongue-in-cheek style, right down to menu descriptions that read more like a comedian's notebook than a fast food board. And here is the detail that stops people cold. Because they started in a Georgia college town and grew outward through the South, this chain built a following so loyal and so regional that for a long time, huge parts of the country had genuinely never heard of it. While in the South, students would practically riot with joy when one opened near campus. It became a kind of Southern in-joke, a badge of belonging. If you knew what that sauce was, and you had a favorite order, you were one of us. Two friends in Statesboro, one addictive sauce, and a sense of humor turned into a chicken empire that Georgians are fiercely proud to call their own. And that brings us to food number 11, the one I promised you at the very start. This is not a glittering brand or a billion-dollar drink. It is a humble snack sold from the back of pickup trucks and roadside stands all across Georgia. In brown paper bags, warm and salty and dripping. Boiled peanuts. Now first, the food itself. Most of the world only knows the peanut roasted, dry, and crunchy. But in Georgia and across the deep South, they take raw or green peanuts, still soft in the shell, and boil them for hours in heavily salted water, sometimes with spices thrown in, until the shells turn soft and the nut inside is warm, tender, and intensely savory, almost like a bean. Georgia is central to this because the state is one of the great peanut growing regions of America, producing a huge share of the entire national crop. And its most famous peanut farmer, a man named Jimmy Carter from the tiny town of Plains, went on to become president of the United States. But here is the detail that stops people cold, and it is why I saved this for last. The affectionate Southern nickname for the peanut is the goober. And the word goober does not come from English at all. It comes from a word in the Kimbundu and Kikongo languages of West and Central Africa, often written as nguba. That word crossed the Atlantic on the ships of the slave trade, carried in the memories and the language of enslaved Africans, who also carried deep knowledge of how to grow and cook the peanut. So this cheerful, salty roadside snack, sold with a smile out of a paper bag on a hot Georgia afternoon, carries in its very name a direct thread back to Africa and to one of the darkest chapters in American history. It is a reminder that the food of a place is never just about the place. It is about everyone who was ever brought there, willingly or not, and what they carried with them. That is why boiled peanuts are, to me, the most Georgian food of all. Simple on the surface, and layered with history all the way down. So there you have it, 11 foods and drinks, and not a single one of them a peach. The soft drink that conquered the world. The chicken sandwich people queue around the block for. The cookies sold by 9-year-olds. The sweetest onion on earth born from strange soil. The diner that measures hurricanes. The birthplace of diet soda. A stew 2 states will fight you over. A frozen orange worth a road trip. A fruitcake empire. A chicken chain with a cult following. And a bag of boiled peanuts that carries an ocean of history. Georgia gave the world all of it, and most people never had the faintest idea. So now, I want to hear from you. Which one of these genuinely surprised you the most? Did you have any clue about the Coca-Cola story, or the real origin of the word goober? And most importantly, what did I miss? Because I promise you, this list could have been twice as long, and I want to know which Georgia food you think deserved a spot. Drop it in the comments below, and let us settle it together. If you enjoyed this journey through the real Georgia, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because next week, we are digging into the surprising origins of foods from a state you would never, ever expect. You genuinely will not believe the first one. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.